Welcome back. The share markets posted a massive jump in early trade today, banking on exit poll predictions of continuity and political stability. The 30-share Sensex rallied around 2,000 points this morning, while the 50-stock Nifty recorded its biggest jump in 4 years during the market opening. Remember, the jump comes even as experts had cautioned that markets would remain volatile in anticipation of the results tomorrow.
And in fact, market watchers are calling it Namo High, that is Narendra Modi High. Several PSU stocks from multiple sectors such as railways, defense and also aviation and tourism will be in focus following exit poll results that have hinted at 350 plus seat for the BJP-led NDA.
Absolutely. A BJP win on the 4th of June with a strong mandate. With a strong mandate would, of course, signal in some ways policy continuity and also help capex linked sectors to sustain high valuations. That's what experts have told us. And but what we'll try to do in the course of next 30 minutes is try and understand the movement in the market and also understand why did it react this way and also the impact of electoral wins and defeats. For that, let's talk to a panel of experts today. We are joined by Vikas Khemeni, who's the founder of Carnelian Asset Management. We have Radhika Gupta, MD and CEO of Edelweiss Mutual Fund. We have Manish Dangi, who's the founder and CEO of Mosaic Asset Management, and Atul Suri of Marathon Trends PMS. Starting with you, Mr. Vikas, how do you...
Atul.
Okay,
yes.
Starting with Atul Suri.
Yes.
So the new highs, the new high, like Maria said, is being called the Namo High. What kind of impact does the exit poll result indications have had on, the movement of the market that we've seen in the last few days? Because, there have been ups and downs, but today it has been really great. Do you think that there has been some, some motion to assuage the jitters that we saw a few days ago?
Yeah, I mean, what you notice is that prior to the run-up of this exit poll, the markets have been pretty sideways. And that's been a bit surprising, So essentially, the markets are looking confused. They've had a few days up, a few days down. But going into this result phase, the market was looking very confused as such. So we didn't really have any pre-result run-up, etc. So when the expectations were low or there was no real build-up, in fact, the system also had a lot of shorts built into it. So there was a surprising lack of optimism or a certain amount of confusion in the market. But when the exit poll came out, which was so decisive that even if there's a margin of error, the market participants felt that, yes, the continuity would go and it would be a big mandate. So that's why the market had a re-rating. And in such times, when you have such sort of gap-up movements, there's a lot of element of short covering. So on a day like this, you will find that stocks that are beaten down or sectors that are beaten down prior to that, for example, banking, they tend to have a big spurt up. So today was also a case of, I think, short covering. Of course, there's going to be action tomorrow and so and follow-ups. So I don't think that the whole story is over on one day. There are going to be many more chapters to this story. But more importantly is that the market was a bit confused and that confusion is out of the way. That's why the kind of spurt that you have in the market is massive.
Yes, because markets are best placed when there is stability, political stability and continuity of sorts. Radhika, coming to you, Prime Minister Modi, in an interview to our editor-in-chief, Mr. Sanjay Pugalia, had emphasized that today's generation should be about risk-takers, basically hinting at more participation in the equity markets. Since many would say that a message of that nature coming from the top political boss of the country, are we going to see more increase in inflow into mutual funds?
I think so, and I think the mutual fund trend is structural. Firstly, I think it is very good to see Prime Minister endorsing the fact that more average Indians should create wealth through equities, through mutual funds. And I think over the last few years, you've seen a meaningful expansion, whether it is in the SIP book, that's 20,000 crores, the number of mutual fund folios, the number of demat accounts. So I think this messaging coming from the highest levels in government is a very, very important message. The second thing is, I do think this trend is structural. If you look at the trajectory that countries like the US or countries like China have followed, as you move from $2,500 to $5,000 per capita GDP, which is the movement that we are making, there is a natural financialization. You move from cash, you move from physical assets like real estate, you move from gold towards financial assets. And even today, with all the growth we've seen in the last few years, for instance, mutual fund penetration to GDP is a meager 16% when the world average is closer to 70-80%. So this is going to happen. Certainly a stable government, and what we've seen in the last few years and what we saw today will give a further thrust to it. It's a natural trajectory that India will see, and it's very important for domestic capital to get stronger and stronger. That makes our markets more resilient to foreign flows as well.
Right. Mr. Vikas, as most exit polls predict a landslide victory for the NDA, there is a sense that the bullishness that's surrounding the BJP's return to power for the third term has pushed some sense of, all the Indian benchmarks, because we looked at the numbers that Nifty 50 is at, and of course the Sensex numbers today. But after the sharp gains that we saw today, is there a scope for a rather flat trade tomorrow?
I think very hard to call out what tomorrow. Of course, large part of the possible uptick due to short covering or additional inflow would have been done. But I think probably a % or two might be still positive. I don't think reason why it will be negative. Some of the probably short covering might happen further tomorrow. Some new flows might come in. So I don't see a negative day, but at the same time, I think large part of the possible uptick is done. I think and if you see post any election in the past, after 1 or 2 days of euphoria, once the elections results are out or any big event is out, I think the life comes back to normalcy, and you start you go back to your normal stuff in terms of fundamentals, earning growth and liquidity stuff. So I guess it's a 2 days excitement, and of course vote for continuity is far more important, which all of us have been waiting for. And I do believe that from a medium term to long term perspective, India is one of the best wealth creation cycle ahead of us. I do say that India, it's an Indian economic miracle waiting to happen over the next 10-20 years. And so one should approach this from that perspective rather than what happens in a day or two.
And one of the stocks particularly was that also of Adani Group. In fact, the shares of 3 Adani Group companies hit record highs, and a broad-based rally in the infrastructure focus. There has been infrastructure push particularly that we have seen by this government. How much of that do you think will have the bigger message that will be sent, particularly of this for this conglomerate?
So I don't want to comment on a particular group as such. I think, for the fact that, Adani Group stocks have some very, very good assets like support and renewables, one should look at from that perspective. Of course, infrastructure spending is one of the biggest focus of this government, and I'm sure lots of companies which are focused on this will benefit from that. And in general, I think, I do believe that we are in one of the biggest infrastructure spending cycle ahead of us, and also another capex cycle ahead of us. There's a massive amount of investments happening across industries, and we will see that only getting accelerated. Manufacturing is one of the big trend ahead of us, and I'd see that getting accelerated with this continuation of this government.
Mr. Manish, Adani Ports and Adani Enterprises were among the top 10 gainers on the benchmark Nifty 50 index today, which also rallied to a record high, even as exit polls ensured some sense of stability, at least the prospects of stability. How do you see this, sir?
Well, that's good for Adani's, and again, it sort of belongs to core sectors, and likely that this government would its heart is there, in actually building core sector. Capacity utilizations are very high, and as such, एक ब्राह्मण ने कहा है कि ये साल अच्छा है, और rather 5 साल अच्छे हैं for Adani Group, so it should do well.
Yes, Mr. Manish, the government is also likely to focus on measures for small and medium enterprises, because there's so much talk about manufacturing. In fact, the plan of 100 days, first 100 days, that has already started. The Prime Minister took a key meeting today. In fact, there's what we hear from our sources, and Maria would also agree with this, that there could be a lot of focus on smaller towns, because there is going to be emphasis on industrial growth and also employment. And this is going to go beyond metropolitan cities. How would the market look at something like this, sir? Because all of this is in the realm of Viksit Bharat 2047, something that the Prime Minister seems very serious about.
So small businesses are I mean, not necessarily in the catchment area of markets. It's a second order effect. When there is a capital creation in small businesses, of course, there is a benefit. A second order effect happens on larger companies, and this is what markets would share. But in general, if India were to grow faster than 6%, which has been its last 25, 30 years of growth rate, the only way would be that a very large part of economy or industrial capex happens in small businesses. Large corporates represents only 10-15% of the total capex.
Right.
So that's the part which has been missing in India for the last 8-10 years, and hopefully, given high capacity utilization, low leverage, great banking balance sheets, and of course now continuity on the political front, should pave way for some risk taking. This is what Mr. Modi meant in terms of risk taking. It's not about risk taking in equity markets. It's that the promoter must be nudged to take risk and build India.
And Radhika, would you say that the theme today, of course, was the PSU stocks, SBI, NTPC, ONGC, Power Grid, all these shares gained nearly 9% today. And we have seen big reforms post 2019, particularly of the PSUs. Is there a sense that in the public sector units, there would be much more in an impending third term of Prime Minister Modi?
Well, I think I wouldn't want to ascribe a theme to today in particular. I think if you look at the segments that you talk about, whether it is power, whether it is public sector banks, whether it is defense, where a large number of players are PSU banks, they have been in flavor. They have been interesting for the market for the last few years. At some point, I think the stocks, constituted undervalued stocks. In many of these sectors, I think defense is a classic example. Indigenization has been a very, very strong story. The export story has shaped up very well. And I think that has led to a re-rating in PSU stocks. In defense, for instance, order books are very, very large. So I think what you saw today is a continuation of the theme that the market has seen for the last 12 to 18 months. And if that capex push, that private sector investment push that everyone has talked about is to continue, then there's no reason that this will not continue. I always caution investors, however, that, despite all the themes, there is a sanity and reality of valuation. So as investors, we always have to balance that. Market moves this week are likely to be volatile. But finally, markets and individual names will come down to the reality of earnings. That said, I think PSUs for individual pockets, whether power, defense, have been a story for the last 18 months. It's no surprise that, that continued today.
Right. Mr. Suri, also now this is an associated question, what are the share market's expectations from this, from the next government? Because, of course, there could be some expectation of measures to boost private investment. But of course, is there also a sense that there is a need for cut in long-term capital gains or something else? Or maybe what is the mood like amongst the foreign investors at least?
So I think the thing that matters beyond these elections and the short-term euphoria is that there's a lot of talk of the first 100 days of the government. And the interesting part is the PM has extended to 125 days, where he's added 25 days for feedback from the youth. So I think that's very interesting. That shows the mindset of the government. But I feel that in the next 125 days, there will be a lot of policy measures in specific industries. And I, as an investor, would be focusing on these spaces. For example, there are 5 of them which come to mind. First is green power and energy, and you can also see that playing out in stocks. Second is electric mobility. Third is the whole talk of creating 10 new cities for manufacturing and services. Digitization of land records, which will affect the real estate sector, and whole thing of transportation and logistics. So I feel that the government is going to push to these 5 areas. So beyond the euphoria of the next few days, which may be, as due to various market activity and participants, I think these are going to be defining. One is at an index level, right, which is not very cheap. But there are certain pockets where the government is going to go all out. Like we have seen how they went all out for defense and the kind of impact it had in defense stocks. So I do think that these 4 or 5 themes will play out in the next few days, and that's what I would be looking as an investor.
But Radhika, also there could be a lot of emphasis on welfarism because, Maria, we did see the political campaign and it was centered around social justice. So there is a sense that welfarism is in, and it's in for the longer term. How would the market and how would experts, how would investors look at a model that's built on populism?
I think resorting to extreme populism is always a risk for India. But I think the past track record of this government, including the budget that just went by, shows that even in a pre-election year or election year, they've managed to strike the fine balance between what is populism and investing for the future and maintaining levels of fiscal deficit. In fact, I think multiple statements have been made that even these levels of fiscal deficit are not ones that we are going to sustain for a long time. And priority, even in the toughest times of COVID, has been put out that we are going to focus on capital expenditure and building for the long term rather than the shortcuts of revenue expenditure. So I think that is a track record that we have behind us, and markets would look for that track record to continue and for that fine balance to continue.
Right.
And coming on this point that has been made here, Manish, particularly to do with over the next 24 to 48 hours, does it, that stability or the swing that we are seeing in the market, does it stop immediately, or will we be seeing more optimism that is because of the exit polls, and which will, if it actually comes true, then it will translate into actual results tomorrow?
So, I mean, these happy hours are because
Happy
of two
hours,
things.
yes.
Because one, of course, some part of the market, market thinks of things as probabilistic, and at least 10-15% chances were there that the mandate wouldn't be as strong. So that anxiety is getting, it's sort of a relaxant to the market, and which is getting unbound. The anxiety is getting unbound. And of course, there's also to do with, a lot of technicalities in the market. Those very 15% bet on the, had bet on the market, on the short side, and they have to recover. And which is why mega caps are recovering, which is where, foreigners are sort of returning to India and recovering their sort of short bets. If you ask me, beyond 2-3 days, would it last, as everyone else in the panel have talked about it, that it's going to depend upon growth dynamic, its profit cycle of the country, and sort of primarily the capex cycle does pick up meaningfully, especially the private capex, because public capex is going to be unwinding now.
Right.
There's going to be less government over the next 5 years than what it's been for the last 5 years, and which is why the private side has to kick in to ensure that the profit cycle actually continues.
Right. Mr. Suri, also help us understand when the FM, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said a few days ago that voters of India don't want unstable governments. Is it to mean that normal products of coalition governments are seen as unstable? Because she did speak a lot about a clear mandate and also strengths of stability. How do market experts look at something like this?
I think India has been blessed with political continuity. One of the big factors that why India outperforms most global markets. First of all, most global markets are doing great. They are near lifetime highs. But India is actually stand out in terms of performance, whether it's during a correction or the up move. And I think one of the big factors is political continuity. Assuming things work out, we are talking about the 15 years of the same government. If you look at all global big players, there are so many democracies that are going into vote, and all have a chance of the government changing. Look at US, right?
Yes.
You have to choose between Biden and Trump. It's a very difficult choice, and either are a bad choice, I think. If you look at UK, you know that the current conservatives are going to be knocked out. So you will find that a lot of democracies in the world are getting into the election mode.
Yeah.
And in all places, there could be likely changes in government. India is a standout country because not only do we have political continuity, it is stability and a government which I think in the third term, you can see the focus of the Prime Minister even before the elections, talking so much about economy growth. And I think that this is really going to stand out. I don't think any foreign investor will be able to ignore India for long.
Right.
Yes, they may play out due to various technical reasons, being oversold, overbought, etc. variously. But India is going to emerge as a shining star, and political continuity is going to be right up there. And that, I think, is going to drive equity markets even further.
Let's
We will
try
be an
and
expensive market.
wrap up
We
this
will always be
conversation.
expensive.
And we have just enough time for the final comments from all of you. I'm going to begin with you, Radhika. Which are the sectors where it will be a massive positive impact? Because I'm looking at what the various brokerages have said with regards to exit polls. Everybody is bullish. Market is bullish. So which are the areas where you are expecting positive impact immediately, not, perhaps short to medium term?
I think short to medium term, I would say three that we are bullish on in portfolios. Industrials and beneficiaries of private capex and manufacturing. Beneficiaries of reforms. I think this time the PSU bank story in particular, given bank balance sheets, is very strong. And I think more medium term, India is seeing an incredible wave of premium consumption.
Right.
Okay.
Atul
Because-
Suri, your last,
Yes.
Mr. Suri, your last word, your closing remarks on what are your expectations from the new government?
As I said, the agenda for the next 125 days is what dominates my mind. I look at green energy, I look at electric vehicles, infra for the 10 new cities, real estate because of the land records, and logistics because that's what really makes the speed of business faster. So these are the 5 themes I would focus on.
Okay, and because, because this is going to be a government in continuity if these numbers hold, and Mr. Modi is returning with a bigger mandate, so he can take far more tough calls. Are you expecting, decisions which were rolled back by the, by the government because of protests that we saw, the farm laws and everything take center stage again?
I'm sure. I think some of the long pending, reforms such as, agriculture reforms, some of the labor reforms, judicial reforms, which government has been intending to do, I think they will definitely find flavor and a lot more focus on that. But I'm sure, the way I understand is that as far as the economic reforms are concerned, our government will continue more of same with a lot more focus on execution and acceleration. If you see Prime Minister's today's article, he's focused on 4 things: speed, scale,
Yes.
scope, and standards. And that talks about that, what is the intent of the government very clearly. And manufacturing will be one of the biggest rise along with all other factors.
And Manish, your closing remarks on, Mr. Suri had pointed out that this is an election year for many countries. So what are the other geopolitical factors that we need to factor in as we talk about the way forward?
I think, what matters, of course, to India geopolitically is oil and US recession. Beyond these 2 variables, little matter. So Trump likely is going to be a small risk off, but not significantly and generally favorable for India. And US recession is something that everyone has been waiting off, and it never arrives. But at some point in time in the next 3-6 months, as and when US recession arrives, it would sort of lead to some risk off. So these are the 2 major risks, from outside that would come in.
Right. So benchmark indices Nifty 50 and Sensex have scaled record highs in the recent days, supported by macroeconomic factors and, of course, earnings as well as anticipation of a clear mandate as shown by exit polls. But just about in a few hours from now, we'll see
know the real results.
numbers. Thank you all of you for joining us on this show.
And with that, it's a wrap from Vasudha and me. We'll be seeing you tomorrow through the day. This is your election news destination. Don't go anywhere. NDTV means politics and politics means NDTV.